We are working on Project Jigsaw, a build inspired by 1960s supercars like the Lamborghini Miura and the Ford GT40, and we're building it on this stripped down first generation Boxster. But we took out the original 2.5 liter Boxster 6 and we're going to replace it with the Ford 302 V8 from my dad's 1985 Mustang. The problem is, this engine is 2 cylinders longer than the last engine. Well, it's 1 cylinder longer, 2 extra cylinders. On top of that, this engine has a lot hanging off the front of it. The front of the engine block is here, and the front of the pulley is here. On this, the front of the engine block is here, and the front of the pulley is there. So this doesn't fit in the hole that's in the middle of that car. The first part of our solution is we want to try and shorten up this whole pulley system. We're going to replace the stock harmonic damper, and then we're going to use this supercharger pulley over top of it to try and move the drive system from here back to here. Knocked a couple inches off there. Okay, so even though we were able to knock a couple of inches off the front of that engine, it's still a good bit longer than the engine that came out. And Porsche never left much room in between here and the engine in the first place. So we've got this engine, it's longer than this hole. So we've got 2 options. Basically, we can let the engine move this way, which means we either have to cut out a whole bunch of this and then weld some other structure back in, and that's pushing us up into the passenger compartment. Or we can move the engine back. The issue there is, of course, there's a transmission on the back of it, and these axles have to still line up with that transmission and not, we can't move them back any farther than this. So we have to move the suspension back with it so that that will all work. There's a lot going on as far as location. And it just seemed like sliding the whole chassis back would move everything all at one time. And so I landed pretty solidly on that.
Me back a little bit because the subframe's in the way, but we're probably like 5 inches back.
We're 5 inches back?
Yeah.
Oh, well, yeah, then we're nowhere near making this work. Here's the structure.
Yeah.
So if we left that alone and moved the firewall, we still have the structure. Really, I mean, without cutting into the structure, we're still not getting anywhere.
Yeah.
My biggest reluctance with cutting it in half isn't that we'll be able to get it back where it's supposed to be, but how much structure are we losing when we do that? If you look at Porsche's diagrams, and they were very thoughtful in the way this whole car was put together initially, which shows up in how rigid this open top car is. I didn't want to take away any of that or lose any of that. And so the idea of a new subframe that bolts onto all of the existing mounting points started to make more sense. Attach all of our suspension, even our engine and transmission mounts to that. It ties everything together and we don't make any cuts, which means we don't add any potential weakness into the chassis of the car. So Porsche already designed this with a lot of solid mounting points where you can just bolt right into the frame. There, our engine mount. We got this rear suspension pickup where the subframe bolts here, where this brace bolts here, and then they had a bunch of pieces that bolted together to tie them all to each other, including this, what looks like a heat shield or something, but it's actually pretty heavy, and it's a gusset that ties all this together. So we'll build a new subframe that'll bolt to these existing mounting points, and then we will tie it all together and put our new suspension pickup points relocated further back and all just welded to itself. We don't have to touch the chassis that Porsche did such a good job in designing and building. What does that mean? I bet you think it means right, but it means rechts, which means right. Probably think the L means left.
Huh.
That means links.
Which is a cat.
Which means left, yeah. We did this once before when we decided we were gonna, or what helped us to decide that we were gonna cut the car in half, which we're now not going to do. But now we need to take some actual measurements so we know how far to move our suspension points back for our new subframe. There's our exhaust header hitting over here. No, but here you can see we don't have much room between the pulley and that firewall right there.
No. Oh, you're lifting the car up.
Okay, yeah, I thought maybe.
I just saw it.
I'm against somewhere.
Yep.
Well, that's as high as we can jack it without moving the bolt. Oh, we're all but against there. So we're a little tilted, but yeah, you can see here the axle isn't really going to work if we're all the way back here.
Yeah.
It's almost at its absolute limit as far as what it's able to flex. We're going to be adding a ton more torque than it originally had, and that axle would die very quickly. So I set the engine right about where I think it needs to be, front to back, and without changing anything, front transmission bolt hole lines right up.
Nice.
That couldn't make measuring any easier. We just need to go back that far. It's just that easy.
So the distance from this hole to this hole?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, the distance from that hole to that hole. They had it figured out when they first did all this.
Yeah.
That maybe someday you'd want to do something like this, and so just move it back a bolt hole and you're good.
Yeah, I think they had us in mind.
Now forget the whole subframe thing. We're just going to bolt that right there. We'll be good. So let's address the elephant in the room. Why are we putting a Ford 302 into this project? It's not an incredibly sexy, exotic engine. It is twice as big as the engine that was in it, but still it's not huge. It doesn't make huge horsepower numbers. And there are already people putting other engines into a Boxster, and while they have to do a little cutting and hammering, they're making them fit. And the answer is simple. That engine belonged in my dad's car. So this project, at least in part, is to honor my father's memory, not because there isn't some other easier or more powerful option, but because that's what I want in this car, because it's my car. It's a Ford 302 engine. The original GT40 had a 289, same block. When I'm doing a car build, I like the whole thing to come together cohesively and make sense. And in the end, once this engine is in here and we've made the changes we need to make that all work, it's going to feel like it all belongs together, and that matters. All right, so what we want to do is measure a bunch of points on the chassis and suspension so that we can keep all that lined up as we start to move things. So like these mounting bolts for the engine mount, I want to use these holes as references because we know we're not going to change these at all. So I'm going to stick a bolt in there with a little center mark on it, and then that'll give me a really good reference to the center of this hole. I like to make these little marks. So if you have a circle and you measure across it, and here we got like 760, you divide 760 by 2, you got 380. So that's what we like to call your radius, or what Ryan likes to call his radius sizes.
Radiuses.
Yes. So once you have the radiuses figured out, if you start at this point, usually on a circle, we're going to go from this point, and you just strike a little arc from the outside of that circle, and then you pick another point from the outside of the circle and strike another arc that is that radiuses. They'll make an X right at the spot. And we can confirm that by just measuring from both sides of the bolt head. I mean, this is getting a little crazy, but, and you know, Ryan would just be like eyeballing it, but you're talking about suspension mounting points, not fenders. And so, but like you can see that I just dropped that into the point and it's right on the edge of the bolts going both directions. That's our measuring point. Like that's fine. And you know, again, some things you can eyeball or whatever, but we're gonna be measuring a lot of points. We're gonna be doing math off of those points. So any mistake we make, if you add it to another mistake, it starts to be like a buildup of tolerances, they call it. And like at the tail end of that, then you're all wonky and off because of added up mistakes. Now that we have all those measurements to use as a guideline, what we're going to do is make up a jig. So we have a fixture to make up our new subframe. And the nice thing is that the subframe that is here already, we're going to use as a starting point to at least keep our suspension pickup points for the control arms and everything all lined up. So the only thing we really have to do to support this and make it its own standalone piece, this whole subframe, is we need to support this piece across the top here. Each one of these bolts to this. Once we take it off, that won't be fixed. So piece of simple tubing, we just drilled a couple of holes that will bolt in where the transmission bolts go. That'll fix these locations. We'll attach this piece as well as the other two angled pieces there. That'll fix all the lower part, so when we take this down, it will be in one rigid piece that we can use to make up our new subframe.
Perfect.
Yes, literally almost perfect.
Yeah, should be.
Yeah.
All those right.
By the end, it will have gone right. All right, so we have the Porsche design subframe off the car and now located and clamped to our table. We're going to take these little tubes that Logan made and put them in here, run the bolt through there. We're gonna weld in a little wire frame that will locate these pieces, and then we'll just take out all the Porsche stuff, and we're just gonna have these little free floating tubes that are gonna show exactly where our suspension pickup points should be, and we will build to that little negative space. I think it was easier on the car. All right, so as I'm bolting this together, I'm realizing one thing. We cut these tubes to this exact dimension so that it would locate there, but because of the angles of these, we're not going to get this off once we have these in an immovable position. So we're going to cut these tubes shorter by the thickness of these two washers, put a washer on each side. Then when we disassemble this, there will be a little room. We can take the washers out and there'll be a little room on each side to wiggle this off. It'll make sense after I do it, but glad we thought of it now. So an hour or so ago, we had the subframe bolted on here. Now it's gone, but our suspension pickup points are still here. They haven't moved. is exactly what we need to build a subframe around. Now that we have this, we're going to build our new subframe that's going to locate the suspension points almost 5 inches back from where they were, and that will give us everything we need to build an amazing supercar. So I guess it's time to build a subframe. That's not going anywhere.